Hey,
It's literally
seriously, happy days are here again. FDR is coming to save the day. Okay, the last segment. We left off yesterday with the dismal news. Dismal. You didn't think that was dismal? I thought it was dismal. Caleb, you realize it's fourth period, right?
no.
It's fourth period.
Yeah.
And you're still stuck at 8 o'clock saying, I'm so mad. We shouldn't even be here today. You're still stuck there.
We shouldn't.
We should have at least got it delayed. That's what I'm saying. Because like that wouldn't have affected the game or anything. I don't want to be that guy. I want to be that guy. I will be that guy. I'm not that guy.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the time has come. The walrus said, hello, Noel, et tu, Noel. All right, the end. Some of you are so happy this is the end of the video. I hope not. I hope seriously you've learned a lot. I hope that as future leaders of America, you're taking all this into account, thinking, how can we ensure that something like this never happens again? Like, we spend a lot of time talking about how we can avert wars, right? And all the death and destruction. Well, in this video, the guy's going to compare this to like, this is like, please stop. This is like the worst event in American history, probably other than the Civil War, what happened during the Great Depression. Lights, please.
Although the number of suicides has been exaggerated, to some, it seemed the only way out. I know that people read about the stories on Wall Street, people opening the windows in their offices and jumping out. That actually happened. That isn't an urban legend. People that committed suicide, people who had worked 30 and 40 years on Wall Street and had amassed fortunes, within a period of days, lost everything. This buy one, get one half off, it's offensive. No regard for folks who don't have someone, those who strong arm their way to the top, only to find they got no one to share them with.
Are they playing that commercial based on the video? Not fair. Those people that strong arm their way to the top.
Why wouldn't you have off?
I'm sorry I was unable to return the 2 books until now. The conditions down in the financial neighborhood have been such as to keep us working. Yesterday, a woman jumped from the roof of our building, 44 floors, right past our window. I saw her body lying in the street, and the sight was so harrowing that I became half sick. The effects of the catastrophic crash on Wall Street rippled out across America. Even those who never owned shares and who had never benefited from the stock market boom became victims too.
If you're into like art, and I know you're not, you're only 15 or 16, but the art of production and such, they had the Statue of Liberty there, Ellis Island on there, and Statue of Liberty for several seconds because, like I've said, America's about to make a transition from. Anybody remember the dichotomy that I talked about a couple months ago? I wrote these 2 words on the board that societies, especially in modern times, since America expanded this idea of freedom throughout the world, that we are constantly in this decision-making process. What do we value more, liberty or security, right? So obviously through the 20s, the dominant theme remained liberty, freedom. No government. They didn't want to hear anybody even saying anything negative. Like in the video, they talk about the guy that was saying, hey, there's impending doom here. People wake up that, something's going to happen. This is all going to come crashing down. It's built. It's a house of cards. You know that saying? Like, do you ever build a house with cards? Anybody ever used playing cards and built something like, so like it's just gonna take a little breeze or somebody walk by and it's gonna come crashing down. But people didn't want to hear it. The land of the free, we don't want government intervening. Well, we're about to make a transition from that idea being dominant to 1930, 1931, 1932. Nothing's changing. We're not getting better. America cries uncle and says, you know what? Yeah, we need the security of government coming in and fixing this. We'll give up some of our freedom for the security that we believe this man, FDR, is going to change things. Happy days are here again. That was his campaign song because, again, Hoover was trying to be optimistic too. So there was constant trying to drum up this feeling of optimism, but things weren't working. So yes, government, go ahead. FDR, all these promises, bring them on. We're ready. Things aren't working.
The crash had undermined Americans' faith in their fragile banking system, made up of thousands of small-town banks that lacked the size or reputation to convince customers that their money was safe. As confidence in the economy sank further, a domino effect began. In 1930,
Just an aside for those of you that are just learning how to drive. What do you notice about people driving on the streets in New York in 1930? Did you see any like traffic lights or didn't even seem like there's any stop signs? It's almost like everybody was like they're operating on this common courtesy type thing. Like, okay, you go. Imagine people. I can't imagine living like that today. Although I guess anybody been to Manhattan or downtown New York? It's probably kind of still like that there, isn't it? Do they really pay attention to all the laws, or you just, hey, you better get your car in the flow while you can, or you're not gonna have another chance for a while. I don't know. I just noticed how crazy things were.
31, over 2,000 banks failed.
After the crash, the banks closed. That, I think, was affected us a little more seriously, us, meaning us, the people of my stature. Many people had money in the bank, little bit of money, a couple of $100, $1,000 maybe.
There was no infrastructure then. There was no Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to guarantee people's deposits. There was no way to back up the banks. So if the banks had made.
By the way,
bad
this video was
choices,
made in
you know,
2008,
depositor
so they
paid
keep
for it.
talking
You
about-
lose your money, it wasn't
I'm
fair.
sorry. I'll just 10 seconds.
And then,
A lot of times they refer to like the way it is now. You might not know this, but in 2008, when you were just in preschool or starting kindergarten, there was a financial crisis in America, a pretty big one. Not as bad as this, obviously, but a pretty big financial crisis that had a lot of people fearful. That's when they're making this video like, hey, are we going to relive history? Have we not learned from history? So now we got through that in 2008, and now you've gone through all of these years of schooling, and now there's people saying, wait, are we reliving history? Now it's only been 14 years, and it seems like we're losing sight again of, is this bubble going to burst? Because back then there was a bubble that burst. It was in the housing market. And are we headed there again?
and people would hear that the bank down the street wasn't good, and they worried about their own bank, and then that would cause a run on their bank, and it became a terrible vicious cycle.
Imagine you had
Something
$1,000
like
in the bank, you went to get it, and they
3,000
said,
banks
we don't have
closed
it.
in the
And then next
following
week they
couple of
closed.
years after that.
What?
The whole financial system then seemed not just unstable, but worthless.
After that, when people saved money, they were very leery of banks, and money went under the mattress.
The stock market crash in 1929 did not create the Great Depression, but it did start a sequence of events that eventually culminated with the Great Depression.
Well, you know, some of this is going to sound sort of familiar. The banks were loaning money for the stock market, the companies were loaning money, the brokerages were loaning money, and when those prices fell, all that money just disappeared. Almost immediately, companies began to feel the pinch of not having the capital and having lost money, and they began to lay off people, to let people go, to shut down production.
There were mass bankruptcies. There was a liquidity crisis of exactly the same kind we have today. That is to say, all kinds of businesses could no longer get loans to keep themselves afloat, even if those businesses were entirely solvent. They couldn't get the kind of short-term commercial credit to pay their workers, to buy new inventory, to pay their suppliers. And so they began going bankrupt. And as they went bankrupt, they laid people off. And as they laid people off, demand fell. And this is what does traumatic damage to the whole society. So traumatic that it's second only to the Civil War in American memory as a tragic moment in American history.
My father had a modest-sized insurance brokerage agency. One night at dinner, my father said that he had to fire an employee. And I very cavalierly said, well, he'll be able to get a job, won't he? And my father said, no, he's an older man who isn't very capable, and I don't think he can. And at that point, my father burst into tears. It was the first time I've ever seen my father cry.
You can sell things, your talents, theories, motivation, and even the sound of your own voice.
What is it?
It's like a man.
There was such a change in our lives and all the people around me after the crash. Many of my girlfriend's fathers lost their jobs and they couldn't pay the rent. They were evicted. The poverty was really all around us. Men had no clothing. They were in rags, really rags. They used to wrap their feet up in newspaper and put them in cardboard, makeshift shoes to walk around the street. And then if you took a walk over to Central Park, you saw this big area, a deserted reservoir that had been drained. And they made little huts of cardboard boxes, and they would sleep there overnight. And they called it Hooverville, because that was the name of our president at the time. And of course, all this stock market crash and all this poverty was, of course, put in his lap. It was really, really pitiful.
Like many others, the photographer Alice Austin struggled to keep up mortgage payments as the Great Depression took hold.
A few years into the Depression, Alice Austin runs out of money. There is nothing left. She's out of her house. They take her to a poorhouse. It's a poorhouse out of a Dickens novel. And she lingers there for a couple of years. Miraculously, her photographs are discovered. A few of her photos are sold to Time and Life magazine. And that earns her enough money to move out of the poorhouse and into a decent retirement home. In a sense, her photographs come to her rescue and take her out of poverty and into a year or two of decent living.
Paul Warburg, who so accurately predicted the crash and the depression, saved the bank he ran from disaster by getting out of the market in time. But it was of little consolation to him.
My great-grandfather probably never really recovered his own personal equilibrium after the crash. To be called the Cassandra of Wall Street, I think was very painful for him. And if we all remember Cassandra, she couldn't just see the future. She was also doomed to be disregarded. And I think it caused him to go into a depression of his own. I'm not sure that he ever would have said, "I told you so." I think he felt that it was really tragic that
Pretty
this
sweet mustache.
worldwide depression could have been averted or headed off, or at least it didn't have to crash so hard. And I think it probably led to his early death. When he died, it was the last year of Hoover's presidency, and there was no end in sight.
Happy days are here again.
But in 1932, 12 years of Republican rule came to an end.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Democrat Franklin Roosevelt was elected president in a landslide victory. His first task was to restore confidence.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Anybody ever heard that
Senior
phrase before?
Roosevelt promised a new deal.
The only thing we have to fear
and
is
to
fear
regulate the
itself.
financial system.
There must be a strict supervision of all banking and credit and investment.
Big shift. Government stay out of it. There must
There
be
must
strict
be an
supervision.
end to speculation with other people's money.
The new president acted quickly. He guaranteed bank deposits and introduced laws forcing bankers to operate under strict government supervision. An investigation into the crash was launched by the Senate Banking Committee. It would last more than 3 years, and the 10,000 pages of testimony blackened the reputation of Wall Street. The committee's ambitious lawyer, Ferdinand Pecora, challenged the banking elite to account for their behavior.
He calls these bankers to testify. And what does he learn? He learns that Charlie Mitchell of National City Court had sold stock to his wife to avoid taxes. Richard Whitney, who had so boldly bought stock on Black Thursday, lost money of his own and began borrowing from his brother. And when that didn't work, he began stealing from customers. And he ended up in jail doing time.
The most prestigious bank in America, J.P. Morgan, was also found to be far from blameless. The hearings uncovered evidence of a list that offered preferential deals on stocks to friends in high places, including a former president.
Not only Morgan partners and Morgan family members, but also prominent corporate executives and even some politicians. Calvin Coolidge was on the preferred stock list, for example. That was a practice that a lot of people felt was wrong.
Ferdinand Pecora had a great quote. He said it was shocking disclosures of low standards in high places, which I love because, you could say the same thing today.
In response to public outrage at the bankers' dirty dealings, President Roosevelt set up the Securities and Exchange Commission. Its task, to clean up Wall Street. At its head, he chose a man who knew more about unethical practice than most.
President Roosevelt, when he introduced the Securities and Exchange Commission to regulate Wall Street, named his old friend and supporter Joe Kennedy to be the first chairman. And that's putting the fox in the chicken coop.
Get it? Put the fox in the hen house and the chicken coop.
Although Roosevelt restored confidence in the banking system,
Is he saying the Kennedy
Great
family was
Depression
corrupt from the
lasted
beginning?
until the outbreak of World War II. Then, as now, the globalized economy meant that the crash and subsequent depression rippled out across the world. In Britain, there was a slump in manufacturing, and millions lost their jobs. Germany, still suffering from defeat in the First World War, was hit even harder.
So many people had their life savings destroyed during the Great Depression that it created in many countries a desire for some authoritarian government that would save them, that would rescue the economy. No doubt the crash and the depression strengthened
Liberty,
anti-capitalist
security.
movements. The communists had taken over in Russia, and there were rising fascist movements. Mussolini was already in power in Italy, and Hitler's political base was growing in Germany. And when American-style free market capitalism suffered from this Wall Street crash followed by a depression, it just strengthened those people who wanted to say,
Do you think the people that voted for Hitler voted for extermination of 6 million Jews? No. They voted for the guy that was coming in saying, I got this. Give me the power to control this and I will make your life better. Because this whole, again, the balance, liberty, security. People chose security. And oftentimes that means allowing someone greater authority than you normally would, right? And that's how Hitler came to power. And he was very popular. He's saving Germany.
There's a better way.
While communism and fascism prospered, many nations put up barriers to prevent free trade and turned inwards in an attempt to save their economies. Economic nationalism led to trade wars and later World War. "80 years on, those who remember the bubble of the 20s and the crash that followed feel that they have seen it all before.
I don't think we learned anything from it. I have found that people's memories are very short. They make the same type of leveraged commitments where they don't look at the downside risk.
You have a lot of cheap credit in the 1920s. Now we've had cheap credit and people have speculated in houses, and now the housing bubble has collapsed.
You have a heavily leveraged American consumer. He's in debt up to his eyeballs, and he can't sustain that debt. The subprime mortgage crisis is a symptom of that.
In the 80s and 90s, faith in the free market had revived, and as optimism returned, many of the financial regulations which Roosevelt had introduced were felt to be outdated and were slowly dismantled. Yet again, a lightly regulated market allowed speculation to grow unchecked.
We are now reaping the whirlwind of that deregulation. In that sense, we're in exactly the same position as people who are in 1929 when the government turned a blind eye to what was going on in the financial world.
What I do hope and I do think is that the government has learned its lessons and is trying to take steps that are much more active and much more aggressive than what was taken in the 30s to try and stem the pain and stem the decline.
The hope is that such steps will work. But the lessons from the crash of 1929 are that history repeats itself, that human folly and greed are much stronger forces in financial affairs than reason and restraint.
Comments? Agree with that last statement? That we tend not to learn from history because, from our perspective, who are we? We have a sinful nature and we will easily forget those misgivings of the past because, hey, this is what we want now. So we could teach this to every generation. We could teach it every year. You could tell people in the financial markets, hey, you got to be careful. This is what is going to happen. It wouldn't matter because they want satisfaction now. Even though we constantly tell you, why do we study history? Because those who don't learn from it are condemned to repeat it, right? And here we are. Maybe, I hope not. I pray not in the same situation as 100 years ago. All right, back to the notes. We do have some notes to take on this brilliant Friday morning. Oh, I just revel in the fact that I'm where God would have me be right here, right now, Caleb. Am I making you feel guilty? Huh?
I'm good.
Caleb, do you think at one point this morning I was hoping for a delay? Yeah. But guess what? I'm here. So you know what I do? I say, hey, attitude's a choice. I can choose to be in fourth period still complaining, or I can say, this is the day the Lord has made. I'll rejoice and be glad in it. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Hey, we got a new deal. FDR's on the scene. Happy days are here again. Riley, did you ever play Go Fish?
Yes.
Did you ever get dealt cards and you're like, can I get a new deal?
All the time.
Right? So FDR offers America a new deal. Again, this is it right here, ladies and gentlemen. Students of U.S. history, we are about to embark on a pivot, a change in the sentiment of Americans from government, hands off, to we accept government intervention, control, regulation. This is a big moment because from this moment, we will still go through these less regulation, like they're talking about in 2008, more regulation, less regulation, but we're always going to be from the standpoint now, the base point of, yes, regulation is needed in some form. In the 20s, again, Hoover getting the blame, Hoover was thinking like most Americans. We don't want government intervening. You know why a lot of the businessmen were laying in the streets, even though there was all these programs being implemented to help them? Because the American way was, think with me here. This might even make sense to you in the present. Although the last couple generations, this has changed in American culture too. There was a point in America where the overwhelming majority, probably 90% of men, especially, no offense to women, men especially, if you lost your job, this idea of pride was so strong, you would never take government help. You understand what I'm saying? There's still people like that today, but it's changed a lot. Most people are, hey, yeah, I'll take it. Well, last 2 years have taught us. A lot of people say, oh, yeah, I'll take the help. And they don't work for over a year and get paid for it. But there was a time back then where that was taboo. A man would never, for pride's sake, say, I need help. Does this make sense? In the psyche of our culture, men would be it'd be very hard thing for them to do. So they'd rather sleep in the street than say, I need the government's help. So that plays into it as well. All right. The New Deal is known as alphabet soup. Anybody ever have alphabet soup? Do they still have the cereal alphabets? What's it called? Alphabets? You've never had that cereal where it's all letters? Are you serious? Do they still make it? They don't still make alphabets? Like your cereal was letters. So of course, you know. Okay, they have that. Look, these days when you're eating your cereal, you're on your device, most likely, right? When I was a kid, you're eating your cereal, you're reading the box. They used to have puzzles and stuff on the box, and you're, or if you had alphabets, of course, you're like trying to make a word on your spoon before you put it in. That was what you did to pass time. All right, but they're known as the ABCs because all the programs were known by their initials. Almost always 3 letters, like the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. Hey, we got to put people to work. So the first thing they did, by the way, I just spoke of that pride thing. I believe, this is my theory, this is not fact. There's the note, this is my theory being interjected. One of the first programs was put for young unmarried men. I believe it's because of that overwhelming sentiment that no self-respecting working man is going to even accept here, charity, take this job from the government. What? No, I can make it on my own. So they start with giving these jobs, literally the government is paying for you to go work at maybe cleaning up a forest or working on soil conservation or along riverbeds and stuff like that. Something that will not only give you a job and get you paid, but will also be helpful to all people for the environment. So the government's trying to do 2 things. Primarily, give people income. And secondarily, hey, while we're at it, we might as well help the infrastructure of the country at the same time. So it's not just giving people busy work, like you're actually going to do something that's going to benefit society. One was the CCC. We talked about this earlier. Before the Depression happened, farmers were already in trouble. We already had a crisis in agriculture with overproduction. Technology had allowed farmers to produce more and more crops. What are we going to do with this surplus when you go to market and there's way too much wheat and the demand's the same? Guess what's going to happen to the price? It's going to fall. It's going to go from $1.09 a bushel to 30-some cents a bushel, right? That's the market. That's what's going to happen. So how do we alleviate that? One way is the government can just simply pay the farmers. Here, we're going to subsidize your income because you're losing all that money. Another way is cut the supply. Oh, we have an abundance of cotton this year. Here, Miss Schmide, what you're going to do is you were planning on reaping your harvest, right? You're plowing it under. What? There's people living on the street in rags, making makeshift shoes, and the farmers are being paid to plow their crops under. Oh, your livestock, you're fattening the pigs, you're gonna send them to the market, right? No. The farmers are gonna get paid to just slaughter the pigs and not go to the market. What? There's people that they're going without eating. This was a very short-lived program. It wasn't very popular, even though it was designed to make economic sense to help farmers who really needed the help. People couldn't get past the surface idea of, Annie's like, what? Why wouldn't you just use all the surplus food to give to the people that needed food, right? When I was your age, and I worked at McDonald's and Wendy's, by the way, and like there's a time, especially like lunch or dinner at rush hour, right? So you're constantly just making burgers because you know people, there's X amount of Big Macs going to be sold. So you're constantly making them so people don't have to wait. Well, now it settles down and you've got 3 burgers out there on the tray, and now you haven't had a customer in 15 minutes. Well, those expire, right? They throw them away. What? Perfectly good food. We're throwing it away? Why don't you just give it to the employees to eat? Anybody work at a place like that? So, do you still see a lot of food thrown away? Yeah. So, people are like, this doesn't make any sense. In the midst of all this suffering, we're throwing all this food away. But again, what was the point? The point was to help farmers. They were in a crisis. What are we doing? Another one, the NRA. No, not that NRA. This morning, there were people that never heard of the NRA. Is there anyone in here that never heard of the NRA? When I say NRA, I mean the NRA. The National Rifle Association, really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the National Rifle Association is one of the biggest organizations in the world, or in the world and in the country, based on the Second Amendment to uphold the people's right to bear arms. So we have a lobbyist group in the country that people pay membership into to make sure that the people in Washington don't try to pass laws that restrict people from their inalienable rights as written in the Bill of Rights, that you cannot tell someone they can't have guns to defend themselves. That's the NRA of today. This is the National Recovery Administration that was encouraging businesses, just like Hoover tried to do. Remember, Hoover's attempt was, hey, we're all in this together. Let's voluntarily. Jake, you own a company. And I realize that you can't keep employing 50 people. You just don't have the money's not coming in. You have to lay off at least half your people. I get that, but can you sacrifice and keep those 50 people? We're in a crisis here. And if you did that, you get. Did it ever make you feel really good inside when you were young and you got your paper back and had a star on it? The teacher wrote like, wow. You had that sticker on there, right? If you did that, your company would get the Blue Eagle. You are a patriotic company doing what needs to be done for the sake of America to get out of this situation. You get the Blue Eagle symbol on your company because you are making those sacrifices. And any patriotic American like Noel and I, when we have a choice to go to this store or that. We see the Blue Eagle. Those are people that we're going to support because those are the people that are making the sacrifice to try to get us out of this depression. Again, not popular, short-lived. The companies are like, okay, we'll try. Jake's like, 2 months later, dude, I either have to let the people go or I have to just go bankrupt and I got nothing. So it doesn't last very long because no matter how much they try, things aren't changing. Things aren't turning around. This was a big deal. Most of you have seen these 4 letters before. You just don't know it. Next time you go to the bank through the drive-thru with your parents, you'll probably notice this sticker now. I think it's usually gold colored. There's a sticker on almost every bank you go to at the drive-through window or go inside, and it's about this big, and it's going to say FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Why? Because the banking crisis that happened, remember that? It's a Wonderful Life. You go to the bank, your money's not there. What? That's my money. I want my money. What do you mean my money's not there? To ensure that that would never happen again, when you put your money in the bank, the federal government says your deposit is insured now. You might not get it that day, but now you have insurance backed by the federal government that says if something was to happen, that $1,000 you have in the bank, you're going to get it. Sound like a good deal? So that would never happen again, that we'd have these run on banks where the banks would be totally wiped out. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Along with this, you know how banks always get the holidays anyway, like schools and banks, there's certain places that are always closed on holidays. FDR went beyond that. You know, they weren't just going to be closed on Christmas. He created bank holidays. Your bank's going to be closed all week. For the next 4 days, the banks will close. That gives the banks time to recuperate. Nobody's going to be coming in trying to take their money out. They're closed for short periods of time. Bank holidays. Give the banks a chance to recover. So here's what we're looking at. We're looking at finishing up. There's one more slide with these ABCs, these programs implemented. We're going to take a closer look at who was this FDR guy. By the way, they showed him in that one speech, and he's standing there at a podium. It looked like I was trying to check out the podium, see how strong it was. How many people know what disease FDR was stricken with? And they tried to hide when he was president because there's that other thing about people. They're so superficial that if you see a guy in a wheelchair, oh, we're not going to vote for him because he's in a wheelchair. Anybody know what disease he had? Polio, yeah. So for him to be able to stand for any length of time, to be, he's holding himself up because he's wheelchair bound. And a lot of Americans didn't know that because, of course, they would try to hide that. Because any weakness people would see, no matter how much they liked his ideas, oh, guy's in a wheelchair. They're so superficial, aren't they? Better. Hey, you better not be taking them lightly.
Oh, no. I'm going to watch the film in the next period against Sebring. Everyone says it was bad.
They beat Badger.
But I'm going to watch the film.
Are you sending those to me right now?
Oh, what am I looking for?
I need UTT notes. And Mrs. Tosh needs American history.
Theology. It's just a click away.
Thank you. You'll make my day a lot easier now.
Happy days are here again.
Well, I tried to get here fast and then I got in trouble for animal, so.
You got in trouble? That's awesome. What? You should have seen the look she just gave me. Happy days are here again. The skies above are clear again. Lights, please. Hey, thanks, Maddie, for turning on those lights. Thanks, Jake. Dope.
Can we
Did
open
you guys win yesterday?
They won one game, one of our games.
Hold on.
Why is there no cooling in this room?
You won? You lost one again?
Who did we lose? Do you like live in a sauna or something? It's always hot in here. It's hot every day.
You don't understand. Every other class complains how cold it is in here. You're coming from phys ed.
Guess who's back?
Even whenever we work on
Your favorite person ever to exist,
and
ever.
it's definitely locked in the hallway.
Me.
That's pretty awesome.